in Philippine history. This is again Miss Hey everyone, welcome to Readings in Philippine History. This is again Miss Caroline Amante, and today we will talk about and revisit Cory Aquino's speech before the U.S. Congress. But before that, a few reminders as we go along our lesson for today. I know we have differing views about the Aquinos and Marxes, but please hold that thought. Remember that this talk is solely for our academic endeavors and does not in any way compels anyone into believing anything beyond their own ideals. So without further ado, let's get this started. The entire country was placed under martial law as Marcos implemented Proclamation 1081 on September 23, 1872. The country experienced a short-lived economic improvement, and in the later years of the Marcos regime experienced a series of social unrest as political and social freedom were continuously suppressed. Benigno Aquino Jr., being the president's arch-rival, was a hot target in the eyes of Marcos and his loyal associates. After Ninoy Aquino's assassination, the then President Marcos was so bent into proving his credibility as the one democratically anointed leader of the country. Knowing that the odds were on his favor, and he had the government's machinery to back him up, on February of 1986, he then called for a snap election, and together with his running mate Arturo Tolentino, they were up against the united opposition of Corazon Aquino, who was Ninoy's widow, and Salvador Laurel. Then the voting was rigged to their own favor. EDSA People Power Revolution happened, a massive gathering of civilians from all over the country. It was a peaceful yet ardent means of ending the dictatorship of Marcos. People who were tired of the living conditions under the martial law gathered up against the streets of EDSA to successfully overthrow Marcos from the presidential seat. After that, Cory was then elected to office. 7 months after her appointment as president, on September 18, 1986, Cory delivered a speech before the U.S. Congress, in which she was warmly welcomed. She began her speech by introducing herself as Ninoy's widow 3 years after leaving the United States. In 1980, Ninoy suffered from a heart attack from his confinement cell at Fort Bonifacio. He was then transported to the Philippine Heart Center, yet he refused treatment from Filipino doctors and insisted to be treated in the United States. The Marcoses wasn't in favor of this request at all, but it was later approved under the condition that if he stays in the United States, that while in the U.S. he will not talk against the Marcoses. He lived for 3 years together with his children and wife in Massachusetts before returning to the Philippines. She talked about losing Ninoy 3 times. The first time was when he was incarcerated in Fort Bonifacio. Her speech reads, "The government sought to break him by indignities and terror. They locked him up in a tiny, nearly airless cell in a military camp up in the north. They stripped him naked and held the threat of sudden midnight execution over his head. Ninoy held up manfully, all of it. I barely did as well. For 43 days, the authorities would not tell me what had happened to him. This was the first time my children and I felt we had lost him." Unquote. Ninoy survived the first detention and was later charged with subversion, murder, and other crimes. The second time they lost him was when Ninoy sought to carry out a strike which lasted for 40 days to further affirm his stand. When that didn't work, they put him on a trial of subversion, murder, and a host of other crimes before a military commission. Ninoy challenged its authority and went on a fast. If he survived it, then, he felt, God intended him for another fate. We had lost him again, for nothing would hold him back from his determination to see his fast through to the end. He stopped only when it dawned on him that the government would keep his body alive after the fast had destroyed his brain. And so, with barely any life with his body, he called off the fast on the 40th day. And the last and the score described the most painful time they lost him was during his assassination at the Manila International Airport on the August 21st, 1983. Her speech reads, quote, "And then we lost him, irrevocably and more painfully than in the past. The news came to us in Boston. It had to be after the 3 happiest years of our lives together. But his death was my country's resurrection in the courage and faith by which alone they could be free again. The dictator had called him a nobody. 2 million people threw aside their passivity and escorted him to his grave." Unquote. She attributed the success of the EDSA revolution to Ninoy's death. What she meant here was that she accepts the responsibility of building again a more democratic, peaceful government. She also mentioned what unfolded during the fraudulent 1984 elections and the deceitful means of the previous government. She also boasted of the restoration of a democratic and constitutional government. She also put emphasis on the country's growing struggle with communist insurgency and how she plans to address it through diplomatic means and not war. Part of this peaceful means was encouraging the insurgents to leave their homes in the rural areas and return into the peaceful and prosperous life in the mainstream society. She also mentioned the $26 billion foreign debt which constantly rose during the Marcos regime. In her speech, I quote, "Finally, may I turn to that other slavery, our $26 billion foreign debt. I have said that we shall honor it, yet must the means by which we shall be able to do so be kept from us. Many conditions imposed on the previous government that stole this debt continue to be imposed on us who never benefited from it." Unquote. While the country struggled with poverty and unemployment, it did not hamper the people's desire of a peaceful and democratic government. In her speech again, I quote, "Wherever I went in the campaign, slum area or impoverished village, they come to me with one cry, democracy. Not food, although they clearly needed it, but democracy. Not work, although they surely wanted it, but democracy. Not money, for they gave what little they had to my campaign. They didn't expect me to work a miracle that would instantly put food into their mouth, clothes on their back, education in their children, and work that will put dignity in their lives. But I feel the pressing obligation to respond quickly as the leader of a people so deserving of all these things." Unquote. On the last part of her speech, she thanked America and that she enjoins them of building a new home of democracy in the Philippines. The speech ends and she was later congratulated by the members of the Congress. So that was all about her speech, and let us now move on to the analysis. So here are the things that we have analyzed during her speech. The speech was important for the international validation of the EDSA government, and that through her speech she was able to mark the difference between the past government and the new one. This was very important because this new government that Cory has founded was very different from Marcos's government. So this government is founded on the decisions and intentions of the people rather than from a dictator or a leader. She also assured that this government was truly the answer to the people's call to abolish the dictatorial government of the previous administration. The third one is that she said that she would also address the country's problem with the communist insurgency through peaceful means and not war. The fourth one is that she assured the U.S. of a continuing alliance with the Philippines. So the speech paved way into the United States granting the Philippines an initial $200 million as an emergency aid to help rebuild the economy. The U.S. also reiterated its long-time commitment to defend the security of the Philippines via the Mutual Defense Agreement. So the present administration's foreign policy shifted especially towards the United States. She also affirmed that the country will continue to honor its debts, although there was ultimately a way to waive these debts since it was used for the benefit of the Marcoses and not for the people. And throughout her speech, we could tell what ideals and principles is the new democratic government founded in. So that's all for today. Stay curious and awesome.